Hello everybody and welcome to this event today online. My name is Dr. Rebecca Naden and I'm the Director of the Global Risks and Resilience Programme at ODI. Today's event, Transboundary Climate Action and Adaptation Risks in Africa, Raising Awareness and Inspiring Action. This event is actually part of a series of FCDO-funded programmes supporting pastoralism and agriculture in recurrent and protracted crises, known as SPARC. And we want to bring attention today to some of these challenges faced in some of these areas around transboundary climate and adaptation action risks. Concerted and coordinated international action on climate adaptation has been slower in comparison actually to international action on mitigation. And this is really coming forward in the COP26 discussions. Adaptation has historically actually been treated as a local to national concern, whereas mitigation actions have been and still are promoted at subnational to international scales. Momentum is growing to explicitly investigate not only transboundary risks associated with climate change, but also those risks resulting from adaptation at different scales. The 2015 Paris Agreement established a global goal on adaptation in Article 7 and its provisions, recognizing that adaptation is a global challenge with local, subnational, national, regional, and international dimensions. And it's those aspects we really want to pick up on, those regional and international dimensions. Transboundary climate change and adaptation risks, what we are calling TCAR, are the potential consequences or outcomes that could occur as a result of transboundary climate change impacts, and also the transboundary effects of adaptation decisions made by one or more countries, or the transboundary effects of mitigation actions on countries' adaptation options. TCAR can spread via a number of pathways: biophysical, i.e. the potential impacts on ecosystem services and natural resources; finance, for example, the flow of capital, such as investments in another country and foreign direct investments; international mitigation actions that reduce national adaptation options through knock-on environmental and economic impacts; through trade, import and export of climate-sensitive goods such as rice and grains, livestock and livestock products; people-centered, so cross-border movement ranging from extreme displacements to transhumans; and political and geopolitical pathways, such as laws and policies around freedom of movement, regional cooperation on natural resource management, for example. So today, with our expert discussion, we aim to create visibility around some of these TCAR risks, particularly in Africa, and start to foster connections between planners and governments, non-governmental organisations, and others to inspire action to address these challenges. So each one of our panelists is deeply involved in adaptation planning in Africa, and they have insights from different angles about transboundary climate and adaptation risk management. So I'm really delighted today to welcome our panelists. We have with us today Julie Tung. Julie is a technical specialist on adaptation planning at UNDP. And there, Julie oversees a portfolio of adaptation planning projects in Francophone countries and coordinates the new FAO UNDP programme, Scaling Up Climate Ambition in Land Use and Agriculture through NDCs and NAPs. We're also joined by Emmanuel Sek, who's the programme manager at Enda Energy. Emmanuel is also a member of the UNFCCC Expert Group on Action and Support of the WIM and a member of the Global Board of the Global Network for Disaster Reduction as a regional representative for West and Central Africa. And also we're joined by George Wamakoya, who's the team leader and leadership programme director of the African Group of Negotiators Group. And he also co-facilitates UNFCCC negotiations on NDC common timeframes and is the lead negotiator on issues relating to agriculture. So we really have a very expert and experienced panel here to be able to discuss these transboundary climate and adaptation risks in Africa. So as the chair, what I'm going to do is I'm going to ask the panelists a couple of questions in which they have about 5 minutes to respond. But then what I want to do is make sure at the end of the panel response that we actually have time for the audience to ask some questions. But before we get going, we just have a couple of housekeeping points. Just to remind our panelists just to be on mute unless you're speaking. Please just say your name when you take the floor and do respect the time limit. I know there's a lot to say, but we do have limited time. And then for the audience, please do put your questions via the chat function. And if you have a question that's particularly for one member of the panel, please do put that in your chat box. So the event is being recorded, just to let everybody know, and then we will be sharing this recording through the various social media channels, etc. So let's get started. I'm going to address the first question, perhaps to Julie first, to take it first. So Julie, in your mind, what do you think are the most pressing transboundary climate and adaptation risks that need to be urgently addressed, particularly in national planning processes and where possible in regional initiatives if they exist?
Thank you for giving me this opportunity to speak during this event. I wanted to say that my responses will be based on the experience of UNDP on climate change adaptation, where we have a $1.8 billion portfolio of projects that do mainstreaming and adaptation planning, as well as concrete interventions on the ground on early warning systems, water and coastal management, and agriculture and food security. So I'll mention some of the transboundary adaptation risks we've noticed through our work. One of the key sectors is in agriculture, which everyone I think knows is really highly vulnerable to climate change impacts. And in recent times, we've seen agricultural production and harvest failures that have been driven by climate disruptions, for instance, at the moment in Madagascar. And this is one of the critical transboundary adaptation risks, as climate change impacts are felt on the supply chain, infrastructures and logistics, as there are losses and damages across the food value chain. This can lead to disruption in the supply chains and cause food crises, which are in nature transboundary and have consequences spreading across borders. Another key sector is water. It's a major resource that is recognized as needing integrated planning and scenarios to make decisions that are climate proof. And there are related issues on abstraction, scarcity, and stress related to water. For instance, Maputo has been facing increasing water stress in urban and peri-urban areas, and this is exacerbated by climate change impacts. And this could be seen as a local, if not national issue, but actually the issue of water scarcity in Maputo is linked to upstream issues in Eswatini, where there are also issues with droughts and water stress. And this is linked to governance, of course, with old agreements on water sharing that are no longer relevant due to demographic and environmental pressure, including climate change. So this means that we need water management programs that are designed across countries and that are looking at both upstream and downstream issues, and that need to be discussed by water and river basin authorities and regional organizations. Another issue I wanted to mention is the issue of climate security, which is also transboundary. For instance, in Lake Chad, which is across Cameroon, Niger, Nigeria, and Chad, there's been a crisis linked to armed opposition groups. And of course, this is linked to historical development and governance issues, but this is also exacerbated by climate change, which reduces the availability and the productivity of agricultural land, which also due to sea level rise, for instance, is submerging some coastal land. And this further reduces livelihood opportunities for the populations living around the Lake Chad basin. So this creates climate security risk that have potential to spill across countries, for instance, due to climate displacement that can be cross-border, and this can be further linked, therefore, to risk in intercommunal conflicts. So all these challenges and risks require solutions that are not only national, but also regional and global, which I think we'll discuss a little bit later.
Thank you very much, Julie. And now turning to Emmanuel, you've heard of some of those transboundary risks that Julie's raised that need urgently addressing. In your opinion, are some of those the same issues that you're facing in your region, or are there additional ones as well?
So we are not far in terms of TCAR. I mean, what I could say at the beginning is that the climate risk no border, and their consequences, whether human, economic, or environmental, as well as the probability of occurrence, are independent of national border. So we have chance to be a part in developing the report, I mean the TCAR report, and this emerged from the report of the Transboundary Climate Risk Adaptation, particularly when we are talking about biophysical, the intensification of growing frequency of extreme weather events like droughts, slow onset shift. And related to the slow onset, we had opportunity to lead a program here in Senegal, but also it is a regional programs where we see that the consequences in Africa, for example, only in 2012, more than 34 million Africans were severely affected by the effect of climate related disaster, such as the droughts, as I have said, which is a key issues for us, even if we consider it as extreme events, I mean rapid onset, with food crisis, floods, extreme temperature, severely with economic losses estimated at 1.3 billion, according to the UNDRR. So we think that the issues of slow onset, which is not very well known in our regions, need a higher importance in terms of issues that we have to undertake in the different programs. So that include the sea level rise. In West Africa, we have a programs which is dealing with the coastal erosion, and we have also a chance in Senegal to benefit from the adaptation funds, and the infrastructure that was built help communities to at least face with the climate extreme. So these include also the increased temperature, and we know the effect of the increased temperature in the agriculture. We know the effect of desalination in the land degradation, particularly in Senegal, in the Salom Delta. So we face with this a problem of land degradation. So the desertification is a key. We are following the issues of the Convention to Combat Desertification, and country, based on the objectives of land degradation neutrality, start developing some strategies. And we think that there is a missing link in all these strategies. So we have countries that are developing that on a voluntary basis, but there is no initiative at the regional that take the issues of desertification. And we think that if we did not make the bridge amongst the countries, it will be difficult to achieve I mean these objectives, particularly on the issues of water resources. I mean the management of river basin. And if you look at how the different border in our countries are designed, sometimes the borders are very thin, and it is difficult for the communities to perceive even where the border is. If you look at, for example, the pastoralist people, that's why sometimes there is a lot of conflicts alongside the borders. And we think that having a programs that liaise community, because often communities are the same. If you look at, for example, in the Senegal River, the communities that are in Senegal side is almost the same that the communities are in, which is in the Mauritanian side. So I think having these communities interactions may help to deal with the different issues such as the sea level rise, such as the land degradation, and also the issue related to water resources. So I think these are the main issues for me, and the related to the geopolitical risk. We have seen that many young people from our countries are leaving the countries to the Mediterranean with small or weak boats that they use, and we think that this is a real risk for our people. This is mainly linked with the droughts in many areas or localities, and it will be good that the programs that are designed at the country level, that are designed at the regional level, meet at least the needs and the expectations of the communities. And I think that this is not often the case, because when we come to analyze the impact, there is many things missing in terms of helping communities to build their resilience. So these are the main risks that I think are really relevant for the to be considered in the development of the national plan, particularly the NAPs, the NDCs. So we are pushing in Senegal to have the issue of loss and damage that are from the slow onset events be really considered in the NDCs. We have parts in the adaptation side where they talk about management of disaster risk, but the loss and damage issue for us is a key to be considered in the process. We know that during these negotiations in the Glasgow COP, that people are pushing to have the loss and damage really institutionalized in the negotiations, I mean the climate negotiation. And we are doing the same at the country level, at least to help the communities to really build their resilience. So these are the key TCAR that I think could really be considered or taken in the NAPs or the different planning that countries or the region are initiating.
Thanks, Emmanuel. So I'm going to come back to actually some of the points that you and Julie raised in a minute, particularly those around issues around the climate security and slow onset and some of those points on migration as well. But before that, I want to just turn to George. Welcome to the event. George, can I just ask you, in your opinion, what do you think are some of the most pressing transboundary climate and adaptation risks that need to be addressed, particularly in national adaptation planning, but also some of the resources and support that might be needed to either identify those and also to respond to the management of those risks?
Yeah, thanks. I'm sorry I was in a coordination meeting. I could not join earlier. Yeah, I think the key thing here, which I think we need to look at, is the issue of floods, tropical cyclones, droughts, because they go beyond the borders, and we have an example of Idai, which traversed Mozambique through to Zimbabwe, and the issue here is that when countries are doing their planning for their NDCs or NAPs, they are not looking at beyond their borders. And yet what they do as an adaptation actions within their borders may have an impact or a consequential impact on the cross-border. And that's why it's important that we need to have a regional perspective also being looked at in that regard. But unfortunately, and this is where we have to be creative, unfortunately, most of the way we structured the Paris Agreement, it is country focused with very little room in terms of regional. But I think what we do now have an opportunity, because under the sources of inputs for the global stocktake, it recognizes a regional perspective, and the reports that may have been done to look at those, for example, cascading climate risks that are in a particular region now can be, if you have a report, that report can actually inform the global stocktake. And by so doing, therefore, I see an opportunity of informing the successive NDCs that will be communicated in 2025. So in the current architecture doesn't, unless you use the existing infrastructure, for example, the regional economic communities, ECOWAS, EST or SADC, who look at those regional perspectives.
Thank you, George. I think that's a good point, and I want to bring the other speakers, Emmanuel and Julie, onto that question. So, in 2025, we've got the submission of the new NDCs and possibly NAPs. But what do we need to? What support is needed for countries to be able to better consider transboundary climate risks? As George says, at the moment, it's very country focused. The NAP is very country focused. These are important documents, absolutely. But, we know as well that developing a national adaptation plan is resource intensive. We know a lot of countries actually have the plan, but we need to move to implementation. And now we're saying we've got to add onto another kind of risk indicator for those plans. What do we need to be doing to help countries better identify, assess, and then implement responses to transboundary climate? Is it the NAPs or is it a regional adaptation plan? Maybe Julie, I go to you, and then Emmanuel.
Yeah, thank you. So some of the gaps that we have seen at UNDP in our decade of support on adaptation planning has one, that there is still a really strong need to enhance technical capacity in climate change adaptation planning, policy leadership, and action readiness of regional institutions as well. The East African Community, the Southern African Development Community, the African Union, Lake Chad Commission, or the Permanent State Committee for Drought Control in the Sahel, or SILS. And what they need is both tools and approaches and technical capacity for harmonized risk and vulnerability assessments, so that evidence is generated for adaptation planning, but also some support to guide and monitor the formulation and the implementation of regional and multi-country strategies and plans. As you mentioned, at the moment they're getting support for NAPs and NDCs, etc. But those are all national. Beyond enhancing these capacities, there's also a need to integrate adaptation and sustainability measures across multiple sectors. For instance, if we look at the water sector, which I mentioned before, we need integrated area-based adaptation and development, which goes across sector and which is not only related to water, and then therefore needs tools and guidelines to integrate transboundary climate risk in national adaptation planning and budgeting. Another key area is to enhance the role of research and especially some of the regional research institutions, such as AgriMed, for instance. Beyond that, there's also a need for technical and financial support to establish collaboration mechanisms and functional partnerships among countries for climate risk and disasters management, including early warning systems, which I think George mentioned. Another area that needs support is on the formulation of supportive policies and agreements to address transboundary climate risk and mechanisms for the compliance and enforcement of those policies. Another key area for us is also functional mechanisms for multi-stakeholder involvement, not only government collaboration, but also working with civil society, working with private sector on investments in climate change adaptation and mitigation actions. And finally, I wanted to conclude to say that although there is a need for this strengthened regional collaboration, a lot of the solutions on transboundary risks are actually not necessarily regional in nature, but can be also national. And they have to be across systems and across sectors, as I mentioned. So there is both a need for strength and support at regional level, but also at country level to address those transboundary risks.
Thank you, Julie. And Emmanuel, your thoughts? I know you'd mentioned UNCCD, but you know, as one regional initiative. But yeah, just particularly, you know, do you think we need to be, are NAPs enough, or do we need to be thinking in a different way?
Yeah, sometimes the approach differ, and I agree with what Lucy have said previously in terms of what need to be done to support or to support the process. But sometimes we think that everyone understands what we are saying in terms of adaptation or adapting to climate change. So which is not the case. I think we need to enhance the understanding, particularly address it to the local communities, because what I know is that if we don't have a critical mass of people or citizens that understand what is climate change, we will not move anywhere. And based on that, there are many initiatives that are being taken at the local level, particularly related to the promotion of value chain that civil society or local communities organizations are developing. Sometimes I ask myself why the different or the international or intergovernmental institutions have difficulties to boost this or to promote the local entrepreneurship. I think helping people to understand sustainability is a good thing, but another thing is at least to help them to get the profit when they are doing sustainability. And for me, we have regional economical committee or organization that may help at least to develop the milk value chain in the Sahel, because we are producing a lot of milk. And integrating this kind of approach or adaptation options in the local planning, and then think that the local planning may help for the government at least to operationalize the NDCs, because we need to decentralize the NDCs. We need also to decentralize the NAP and have these issues integrate in the local planning. Sometimes you may see, for example, a community from Guinea-Bissau or Gambia that are more close to a Senegalese community than other. Why we will not create this facilitation, the interaction among the different communities? This is another way also to create transboundary solutions. For me, we have to look at on these approaches what the communities really need and how we can help them developing initiatives. Another one is related to the Green Great Wall of the Sahara and the Sahel. We all know the Balanites tree. The Balanites tree is almost in many of the Sahelian countries, and developing programs to value the Balanites That will be for me a very important thing, because we start doing that in Senegal with a woman organization to value the oil. The oil can be used for foods. It can be used also for medicine and cosmetic. So let's look at what, for me, we have to capitalize what people are doing on the ground, and then scale up or boost this to create some, what I think, local entrepreneurship. We have talked about migrations, but why people migrate from the localities that are really degraded to the city or the urban area and after abroad? It's because on the localities they did not find job. So if we say that, okay, by operationalizing what we have already defined, because the main problem, so we have to underline it, is we define different strategies, we define different policy, but when it's come to the operationalization, so there is any impact on the ground particularly. So sometimes we have some programs like WACA or adaptation program that may help, like the Green Wall, and I think this need to be more inclusive. And let's look at also how we could join the force among the borders, but with communities among themselves.
Thank you, Manuel. Yeah, I think that point around decentralizing the NAP, you know, is important. But just moving as well back up to the sort of macro scale, just a question to George. George, you mentioned within the Paris process, within the UNFCCC process, you know, we have now the global stock take with a recognition of these regional risks. But you know, what do you see as the next steps then? What does the international community need to do more of in order to get the resources to be addressing some of these transboundary risks? Is recognition in the global stock take enough?
Yeah, I think let me pick up from where Manuel has finished. One is that for a long time, and particularly with the initial IPCC report on adaptation in 2001, there was this concept that adaptation is local and everything, context and race. And I think for a long time that has been perpetuated. And yet we haven't built that adaptive capacity with those local actions, many of the local actions that have been initiated. And now the science from the AR5 and the AR6 now is showing that actually we need to look at one, the regional and international dimensions of adaptation and climate risks, and that's why the cascading climate risks become important, and that was embedded in Article 7, paragraph 2 of the Paris Agreement, where we are looking, when you're looking at the global goal on adaptation, you are looking at local, subnational, national, regional, and international. And I think that is a game changer for researchers, Rachel, because we have focused more on local, as Emmanuel has said, but we have never looked at how those move and impact on a broader scale. And then the second, to come to your answer to your question is that one, there's very little understanding right now on transboundary climate risks and adaptation, really, because it's emerging now, it's been recognized, but in the context of what is happening in different countries and regions, that has not been documented and worked on, and that's why it's important between now and when we start the global stocktake process next year, leading up to 2024, we need to consolidate the evidence from, if possible, all the 5 sub-regions of Africa to see the extent to which we have these transboundary issues across those regions. And then based on that, therefore, becomes important a source of input into the global stocktake, but also it will inform the outcome that will be involved in when we're doing technical review of the NDCs and successive NDCs in 2025. Now, what do I see as the next steps? One is that we need to consolidate evidence. We need to unpack what is emerging through the IPCC AR6. We need to get best practices that are being implemented, as Emmanuel has indicated, on the ground, and trying to look at the scale and the impact in terms of transboundary. We need to distill and come up with a clear messaging to inform the global stocktake, but also the countries, so that they recognize that whatever actions they're planning and doing within their NDCs or NAPs or whatever mechanism, how it relates to the other country or even beyond the continent. And I think this is going to be important in that regard. And I agree with Rachel that our regional, sub-regional climate centers like IGAD, SADC Climate Center, the AgriMet, and all those are very important in helping and then creating a link with the regional economic communities in our region, and also using the regional economic communities' convening powers to engage with those countries or member states of those sub-regional communities so that they are able to look at what are those emerging or key transboundary climate risks that need to be addressed, and come up with a common approach as to how to do that. And as it has been indicated, the Great Green Wall is one example that we need now to look at it from the transboundary perspective, as opposed to from the initial design, which was to stop the expansion of the. So we have opportunities. There are some ongoing projects that we can evaluate and look at from the perspective of cascading climate risks, and then inform the new. So the policy environment, in my view, is available. All we need to do is, as experts, ODI and the other scientists, how do we consolidate evidence that helps to inform the policymakers so that they can make the right decisions? Thank you very much. And I need to jump out.
Okay, thank you very much, George. No, and good to hear that the policy environment is one that can is now ready to take on board some of these challenges. Thank you very much for your participation. Thank you.
Okay, thanks.
So now I just want to turn actually to the audience. To Julie and Emmanuel, we have a couple of questions from the audience that I just want to put to you guys. So the first question that's been raised is, many of these transboundary risks are issues even without climate change. So how do you think the extra lens, the lens of climate change or the lens of climate change adaptation can change incentives to work more on regionally or globally on these issues? So perhaps, Julie, if I go to you first. So do you, I suppose to paraphrase, do you think, these issues are issues already? What is climate change or climate change adaptation sort of adding to this?
Yeah, it's a really good question. Well, I mean, climate change is recognized as a global issue in nature. So I think that it does add a dimension to those transboundary risks that are not related to climate change. In terms of, I'm not sure that it adds an incentive to work on these issues, but it actually adds to the nature of those risks not being able to be dealt with at national level. I mean, there is, for instance, around Lake Chad, a lot of programs working on security in general and conflicts, and this is a strong interest of donors, especially in Europe, also linked to migration, etc. And I think climate change adds another layer, as I mentioned, because of the link to livelihoods and how this is reducing livelihoods and increasing migration. So I'm not sure whether climate change adds an incentive. I feel more that those risks that are not climate related actually adds more incentive to deal with climate risk.
Thanks. Yeah, no, it is a good question and one that's sort of thought-provoking. So, Emmanuel, what's your take on it?
Yeah, it is a very relevant one, particularly when we are looking the problems or the effect of climate change within the region. If we see how the Sahel is really impacted in terms of climate change, particularly droughts, desertification, having initiative of program to deal with may really help communities to face with, for example, the conflict, because many conflicts are related to resources, water resources, how they can be better managed. I mean, involving communities, for example, having negotiated approach in terms of water sharing or water management, how we could facilitate people moving from a country to another without looking for resources for like the pastorality, without having difficulties because they belong to one country or another. I think there we should know that many issues are linked. We cannot say that climate change is something outside the different issues. So we had to find a way to link all this. Sometimes, just to give an example, people have difficulties to make difference between adaptation and development, for example, and explaining that adaptation is related to sea level rise or increasing temperature, and to deal with the problems that we have. To develop people, you need to identify first the climate change problems. But sometimes we are looking at the development issues to try to solve the problems. And these are the difficulties that we have in the adaptation funds. But of course, the climate change have impact on communities, and there are different programs that are developed and need to be appropriate or owned by the communities.
Thank you. So the questions are coming in thick and fast now. So another question here, this is related to other initiatives. So for example, the question asks, there are climate change adaptation initiatives in transboundary river basins, for example, in the Okavango. How can lessons from transboundary river management assist in dealing with wider transboundary climate and adaptation issues? Perhaps if I address this first to you, Emmanuel, perhaps you can also draw on the experience from the UNCCD Great Green Wall Initiative as well.
Come again with the question.
So the question was, there are climate change adaptation initiatives in transboundary river basins, for example, in the Okavango. How can lessons from transboundary river management assist in dealing with wider transboundary climate and adaptation issues?
Yeah, I think there is a first exercise to do to assess these best practices or initiative and help people to really learn. Sometimes we say that there are initiatives that were developed, but it's sometimes it's difficult for us to know the real impact. When I say the impact is related to economic impact, social impact, and environmental impacts. If I'm not sure that I know very well the Okavango, but I think it's a country lake that involve different countries. So I think the initiatives that they develop, if it is successful, can be really documented and shared with the different partners, particularly if it's belong to IGAD or the African Union, because there are the possibilities to create forum for this kind of initiative. And with the TCAR, I think that it is this kind of initiative that we really need. We have to document it and to show what is cross-country initiative, because cross-country initiative may not be transboundary initiative. I don't know if you get me very well, because what I think is transboundary initiatives is that, yes, we agree that this is the problem that we need to deal together, but not only oriented in a country responses.
Yeah, no, thanks, Emmanuel. I think that's an important point. Yeah, because when we're talking about transboundary in some countries, some contexts, we're also talking about regional cooperation within a country as well. Julie, perhaps just your reflection on this question, any learnings from other initiatives. I mean, I think, UNDP's been involved in quite a number, and I think the program that you're managing as well, what lessons are there? Because I think what's important when we think about addressing transboundary climate risk is that we don't keep reinventing the wheel. We do actually need to be learning from a lot of the experiences within, like, for example, other international treaties such as the Water Convention, as the commentator mentioned there about other transboundary river management processes, but there's also other initiatives for managing land resources as well. So just welcome your thoughts on this point.
Thank you. One thing I mentioned earlier, and I mean, the question is really relevant because there have been commissions working on different river basins and different bodies of water for a long time. And as I mentioned, one of the key issues around integrated water management, for instance, is governance. And those bodies, like the Lake Chad Commission, for instance, have really a lot of experience in doing some of the work that I mentioned around establishing collaboration mechanisms, around working on inter-regional agreements on water management. And we can learn a lot from how they've actually dealt with these governance mechanisms and fostered this collaboration between governments.
Thank you, Julie. Okay, so I don't know if there's any more questions from the audience. We're close to time. I can't see any, but I suppose what I just want to ask the speakers, just their final thoughts. What is your message to COP26 about the need to address transboundary climate and adaptation risks? If you could sort of say one thing to the COP, what would it be? It can be on the urgency, it could be on the approaches that might be needed to manage, but what is your kind of message to the COP? Emmanuel, can I ask you that first?
Yeah, so my message to the COP is that we are developing different programs like the adaptation plans within national adaptation plans in the countries, but we see that the issues on transboundary is missing. And even with the NDCs, the question is, if we do not develop initiative related to transboundary, how could we be sure that we really achieve the global goal on adaptation first and the Paris objective? Because for me, we will miss a part of the process. So there is a need really to define or to develop initiatives that may help us at least to involve people who are concerned by the transboundary issues, and for them to contribute to achieve the adaptation global goal and be part also in the process of Paris agreement. So for me, it is a link that we have to add in the process.
Thanks, Emmanuel. Yeah, so if we're not addressing transboundary climate risks in the global goal, then it's a bit of an own goal. Okay, thank you. And Julie, to you. Just your final thought.
So I think the latest evidence shows that there's really an urgency for action. And I think transboundary risk exemplify how climate change needs systems level approaches. And those are required across ecosystems, for instance, which cross borders, or across value chains, which also, because of the food supply and the production consumption cycle, actually also require those systems level approaches. So I would really encourage parties to discuss the systems approaches that are the only ones that can foster the transformation that we need if we want to tackle this climate crisis.
Thank you very much, Julie. Yeah, I think that's an important point to end on. And if anything, taking the climate lens to some of these issues, if that can help bring a systems approach to addressing some of these challenges, then that is going to be absolutely vital, because yes, at the end of the day, it is a systems risk that we are facing, and countries need support to address these challenges. So that brings us to the end of our session. I really want to thank our panelists and for the audience reflections. I want to thank Dr. Wamukoya, Julie Tung and Emmanuel Sek for their contributions and giving your thoughts this morning. I'd also just like to thank as well the SPARC programme for supporting this, and our collaborators for the TCAR project, the Transboundary Climate and Adaptation Risks projects. We're continuing to work on these issues, and actually we have a kind of a request, an ask of the audience. We'd like to invite you to take our risk perception survey, and the moderator is going to post a link to that survey in the chat box. So please do take a minute just to do that survey, and also feel free to contact us, and you'll see the contact details on the screen. Just to let you know as well, we're going to be publishing a short summary from the discussion this morning in the coming weeks, so do look out for that. And also, one of the initiatives I wanted to mention as well is the Adaptation Without Borders initiative, of which Emmanuel and ODI and other partners are part of. So this is an initiative that has been created to really seek solutions and raise awareness of transboundary climate adaptation risks. And that project, actually, we're going to be launching it on November the 9th. So a bit of a plug for that event. It's between 10 and 11 a.m. And that will hopefully be an initiative that's going to be bringing together many partners who are working on transboundary issues, Water Convention, UNCCD, partners within the UNFCCC process, and also beyond. We have regional partners such as ENDA, ICIMOD, and so on. So I really encourage you to come along to that event. So finally, on behalf of ODI and the SPARC team, thanks very much to everybody for attending, and we really look forward to continuing this conversation on this very important topic. Thank you very much.
Thank you.